Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for being here. This discussion series is part of 1111, a Creative Collective's Artist in Residence program. 1111, a Creative Collective, is a nonprofit organization based out of the San Fernando Valley, serving the greater LA area, that focuses on providing integrated and accessible arts programming through community events, public art, exhibition, and education. This program is sponsored in part by the Department of Cultural Affairs, Los Angeles. If you'd like any more information about 1111 or the upcoming discussions in this series, please visit 1111acc.org. We've invited contemporary artist Zeina Baltagi to join us as our resident artist through December 20th. Zeina is taking a deep dive into the concept of surveillance, investigating the blurred line between the observer and the observed. She has produced a very robust discussion series, which culminates on November 22nd, at which point she will enter our physical gallery space to continue working on a series that she began a couple of years ago titled Marketplace. I'd like to introduce Zeina further. Zeina is a Lebanese-American artist and educator. She was born in Stockton, California, and raised between California and Lebanon. She holds a Bachelor's of Art from the California State University of Northridge and an MFA from the University of California, Davis. Zeina's work explores and exposes the tensions within identity and social politics. It reveals intimate transformations in relation to lived experiences with physical, emotional, economic, and cultural mobility.
Thank you, Erin. Um, so today I'll be prompting to discuss surveillance and policing in service to the white gaze. This is when white supremacy shows itself amongst white and minority groups, enacted in the classroom, on the sidewalk, in our neighborhoods, communities, grocery stores, convenience stores, the park, gas station, through the police force. There is an emotional harm to dispel the energy necessary to keep surveillance or to be watchful of being surveyed, resulting in physical consequences. It is a dimension we all are subject to participating in. I truly believe that I am my point of minimal departure, and it is a good tool to gauge myself in relation to other people and understand how I fit in the larger network. Through open discussion, we could expand on our perspectives and gain further understanding to how we are so utterly vulnerable to each other. Thank you for going on this inquiry with me. This will be the last discussion of this series, breaking down the plural experience of surveillance and being surveyed. I've gained so much from these conversations, and I hope you have too. And I thank you so very much. I would like to add a disclaimer to please understand. Thank you to Nguyen for bringing it to my attention. Please understand we only have our own perspective, experience, and research to pull from as artists and critical thinkers. We are not experts on the subject of race relations, and we do not have all the answers. I hope to facilitate this open dialogue so we can better understand each other and how we fit and mobilize in these constructs. And as I carry forward, I would love to introduce three artists that I deeply admire. Martin Robinson, a Costa Rican artist who has an interdisciplinary background informed by his studies in both physical education, art, and visual communication. He completed an MFA at the University of Southern California, and Robinson's art, which is informed mainly by the African American traditions, challenges the convention representations of Black identities in art history, mainstream culture, and the official national narratives, especially those of Costa Rica. With an often ironic and rhetorical take on the constructs of racism, this practice endeavors to confront the hierarchies and conceptions inherited from colonialism in order to subvert the mindsets and prejudices ingrained in our social experience. Martin Robinson's work exposes the nuances presented in the Afro-Latino experience, enriching the critical discourse of contemporary works of the African diaspora. Robinson has participated in exhibitions internationally, including the Getty Center of California, Museo de Arte y Diseño Contemporáneo, Costa Rica, Expinal Centroamericana, Costa Rica as well. I'm sorry, I'm butchering, I should be better, but Eijkman Arts Center in Boston, La Palais de Tokyo in France, and Bergen Jot in Bergen, Norway. You can find their websites and their Instagram handles on the 1111 ACC page. And with Martin, we'll be speaking Amitis Motivali, who is an artist who explores the cultural resistance and survival of people living in poverty, conflict, and/or war. Her experience as a transnational migrant is foundational in her work through many mediums, including sculpture, video, performance, and collaborative public art. Her work juxtaposes iconography with iconoclasm. Her work intends to ask questions about violence and historical documentation and canonization, while invoking the significance of a secular grassroots struggle. Amitis currently lives and works in Los Angeles, exhibiting art internationally as well as organizing to create an active and critical cultural discourse through informational exchange, either in art, pedagogy, or organizing artists and educators. As well, who's going to be speaking with Martin and Amitis is Tin. Tin Nguyen, born in 1984 in Bao An, Vietnam. Tin Nguyen is an artist, educator, curator, cultural critic whose works investigate the intersections of cultural values. Utilizing various media, they explore and expose progressive socio-political power structures within those values. Nguyen performed and exhibited nationally and internationally, most recently at the Mistake Room, the Hammer Museum, Red Cat, that was a really cool performance, Los Angeles Contemporary Exhibitions, and Contemporary Irish Art Center, Los Angeles. Their work has been written about in Art Forum, Los Angeles Time, Los Angeles Magazine, LA Weekly, Hyperallergic, Artillery Magazine, and numerous online platforms. I am so grateful for these three for their time and friendship and their generous thoughts that they're going to be sharing here recently. So as I open it up, I would love Martin to, I'm going to make you a host and would love for you to share your work, and everyone, the three artists will speak for themselves at first, and then we'll open it up to talking discussion between the three of us. And please go ahead and utilize the chat. And towards the end, we'll open it up so the audience could, get involved and ask questions themselves. So, Martin, I'm making you a co-host.
Perfect.
Wonderful.
So I want to take the opportunity to thank you, Zeina, and also 1111 ACC Gallery for the opportunity. Amitis and Tim, it's also a pleasure to be sharing space with you all. Thank you, everyone who is watching, and I'm going to start my presentation with let's say my recent project, which is, let's go back here. My recent project, which the name of it's under Tecnologías Decoloniales. So I started this project while I was at, let me hold on a second. Right there. Are y'all watching the screen? Oh, I can't hear you, Zeina. Sorry, your audio is off.
We see it. If you want to go full screen,
okay.
Slideshow, that might look better, but we do see it.
Okay. There you go.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I started this project, Tecnologías Decoloniales, while I was at USC, and part of the idea behind Tecnologías Decoloniales, it was to better understand my practice in the sense that I went to Los Angeles to be part of an MFA program, and people start talking about my practice in terms of decolonial. And I don't know, my understanding of decolonial or a practice that deals with decolonial ideas was way different than the way people were picturing my practice. So I started playing with that idea and start calling myself or start working within the idea of tecnologías decoloniales, understanding decoloniales not as mistranslation. If you speak Spanish, you might think is an error that I committed, but actually the culo in Spanish or specifically in Costa Rica means kind of like give a fuck or kind of drop in your ass. And for me, the idea to have to speak under let's say a framework within a definition that better fit my own terms and my own spirituality, not talking in terms of religion, but more in terms of my location, where I come from. And I think it kind of fit perfectly in that sense. So tecnologías decoloniales in this case, it's kind of like started in this idea that I understand that that system plays a lot in my practice. From my formation in physical education, sports, and visual art, I always try to understand the way things work, and then from there try to create works. So system always kind of like been motor to my practice, understanding how things are created, how things work, and then from there try to create a new discourse or try to shift it in that sense. Which means I understand that I participate in the systems, art institutions, recognize that the defiances is, oh, sorry, I'm kind of like just trying to speak Spanish and English at the same time, and the systems and operate those gaps to challenge the gaming. This means the game to create a simulation of the artwork in a sense. Through this idea of tecnologías decoloniales, I try to explore the use of space or studio space or galleries and try to engage with the public to create new work. I believe that the way my work is conceived is not through my entire knowledge, but by trying to engage with others and trying to create a space in which knowledge is shared and there is an economy of learning, and from that learning I could create new work. It also, tecnologías decoloniales also deal with the idea of speculative and alternative space, and also the virtual simulation. So I really believe that there is a great power in speculation. I do believe that the way history is created is through this idea of a fiction which become a myth, and then you repeat so much the myth that it becomes history. So for me, I speculated or tried to create this spaces or these places in which eventually my speculation could become a reality and become history is important. So what it means to relate my own investigation to a virtual simulation in the production of artwork. So in that case, I try to combine my personal experience, my body as an historical element, and also this idea of data, not only data that we acquire from technology, but the data I acquiring for navigating different spaces. I'm gonna kind of like go through some of these pages. So within this idea of creating new spaces and also working with technology, I started working with this idea of tic-tac node. So the tic-tac node is taken from the game tic-tac-toe. In Spanish, we call it gato. And for me, the idea that I could create an installation that uses facial recognition to kind of first, how you would say, like try to have Black people in the gallery space or museum space feel more comfortable with the work that I was presenting somehow. Coming from Costa Rica and being a predominantly country that consider themselves white, I always navigate my art through white spaces. So for me, it's very important to create work that I understand the community that I'm targeting, and at the same time, the community I'm trying to engage. So the idea behind Tecnologías Decoloniales is try to bring communities, specifically Black communities, into the galleries, into the museum. And the idea that inspired the note piece was this gesture that when you're a Black person, you navigate specifically predominantly white spaces, and you see another Black person, there is this natural instinct that you just want to nod to them, like you just move your head nodding. And this motion of the body just create kind of like acknowledgement of each other in that space, and how powerful it is just to acknowledge each other and be in that same space and occupy that space in a powerful way. So that was kind of the idea that started tic-tac node. So the way that the system function, you enter the gallery. Once you enter the gallery, you have a camera that would kind of recognize your facials, and then it would interact with the system. This is kind of the way it kind of looks once the interaction occurs. And there are two results that could occur from this interaction. One, that you actually get this, which is my person, and I kind of like nod back to you. And I'm gonna show you the video or the way that the video function once you interact with it. Just a second. So this is the way the video interacts. Like once it recognizes your facials, it will actually give you like my person nodding back to you or trying to nod to each one of the characters that are presented on the screen. Um, Part of the idea behind this is kind of tricky. You know, if you're familiar with artificial intelligence and the idea of facial recognition, you will kind of know that one of the biggest errors of facial recognition is that it wasn't recognizing BIPOC people. You know, so for me to create a piece in which I'm trying to recognize Black people through facial recognition is almost like a mockery on the system, in the sense that I'm always trying I'm trying to fake the system in a way that yes, it will give you the option to the video, but I'm actually not using your features for that. I'm actually using the tone of your skin. So this is the system that I'm trying to create. Is like trying to fake the system and trying to utilize the same technology that governments use to control us, to turn it back and try to disturb the meaning or the function of that system. So the other piece that kind of plays with that idea of technology and also the idea of uh, surveillance have to do with the slot machine piece. So this piece started at USC also, and what I did with this piece was USC have a policy in which every event that happens around the university that involves the students, I mean like in criminal situation, robbery or something related to a students around the campus, they always send out an email informing you about the situation. So I started collecting all these emails. And of course, I started collecting them because I felt that somehow the emails were speaking directly to me, in the sense that the way that they were structured, it will say something like, yeah, in the corner of Figueroa and 38, there was an incident in which a USC students were robbed, blah, blah, blah. Suspect is a Black male between 20 and 30, black hoodie, blah, 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 black cap, black sneakers. And I always feel very confronted with these emails, in the sense that I live close to the area and I will kind of like have to try to not dress the way they were describing that character that day, or try to try to dress completely differently from what that those characters used to dress or dress or describe in those emails. And for me, it's kind of created this idea of how we always perform in the public space. You know, you're performing in a sense, trying to survive in the environment you live in, and you're always shifting that way that you perform and you dress and you act constantly. And so I started this collecting these imagery, and I started creating a database of let's say characters in which I will take pictures of myself and create this video. So the video is literally me just kind of like in this police profiling situation, and just changing the clothing that I start collecting. And the way this work or envision this project is that it actually also work with skin tone. And the way it functions, you enter a space in which is completely dark. You just have a red light. The red light suggests that you place your arm underneath the light. Once you place your arm, there is a color detector. It detects the tone of your skin, and if you have the right tone of the skin, the system would function. If you don't have the right tone of skin, then you will just hear a loud sound. And system error. And you would not allow, you're not allowed to see the video in that case. So for me, it was important to, again, create these spaces in which I'm giving access specific population, and at the same time trying to create systems to people to understand how technology works and how this systematic practice works. And all this started because I started noticing how, hold on a second, I started noticing how somehow when I used to go to restrooms, you know, like at airports or places like this, I would place my arm and the faucet wouldn't work. Like I started doing more research in those technology and figured out that we all think that all of these technology function with movement, but in reality, they function by a color picker. So the color picker detects the tone of your skin, and eventually you get the soap or you have the fuzz at work. And there were two hypotheses on this idea that one, most of these technology is created in China, and because it's created in China, there is not much variety of a test color to test out the technology. The other one is that in places like Los Angeles, in which you have a high population of in homeless people, like their specific public bathroom, there are programmed in a way that you can actually uh, use the bathroom. So for me, it was important to understand this in the sense that it's not only a policy of controlling the body, but also the sanity of the body, you know, and who get access to use the bathroom and who get access to these public spaces. So I'm always questioning myself, who owns the public space? And I think that that's kind of can make a sense of my idea of surveillance and how it functions in my work. And I'm going to keep it short so I'm not passing the 10 minutes.
Thank you so much, Martin. That's so much to chew on. I have a couple UC Davis folks in here, and I'm really excited for their opinions too, because that Warn Me app or the text messages, the emails, they're so jarring from the university setting. I definitely saw that once the pandemic hit of Asian man walking down here in the street, and it translates. I can't wait to go discuss further. Um, Amitis, let me make you co-host as well now. And I'm going to remove Martin as co-host. Make real quick, withdraw.
I'm going to basically share a sort of an experience through a piece.
Fantastic.
Because I want to talk about the being in the public sphere, and the Muslim body, the femme body in the public sphere. So many years ago, 2009, I started a piece called "Stupid Muslim Joke" / Jokes on Me, and this project was basically, it was just kind of like this immediate project that I started when I was hearing a lot of these jokes about stupid Muslims. And most of them were written or said in Denmark and in the UK, but many from the US, and some of them, I have to be honest, I laughed at as well. But basically, I got all these jokes and I wrote them on my body. With labels, you know, I just got labels, put them on my body, and I asked people to respond to them directly on my body. So they were responding to these jokes directly onto the Muslim body, mine being one. And so here's some photos at different spaces. This is at Reds in Boyle Heights. And this is the kind of bus tour hijacking I did with a group of feminists from Rutgers University. This is another club, I don't remember where. I found that a lot of the hostility I got about this piece was in activist spaces, and people who were not necessarily Muslims saying, "How dare you speak on behalf of Muslims?" I wasn't speaking on behalf of Muslims. I happen to be a Muslim woman. I have that body. I live in that body. And so I was creating a piece about my existence within that body. And it was quite interesting. I mean, like, to the point that, like, people I had worked with for many, many years, they're like, I still got beef with them because of it. I mean, we talk, but every once in a while I'm like, oh yeah, but remember? So I recreated this piece. I was doing a residency in Denmark in 2012. And when I was there, I was invited to go over to the house of this artist, and she was this really. Let me see if I got her. Yeah, that's her. She was actually convicted of racism in Denmark. She became she became someone who was really involved in the neo-Nazi movement in Denmark. And she invited me over to her house. I didn't really know her. I didn't know much about her. Her sister had come out to my studio when I was doing my residency. my residency was in Aarhus and just outside of there in a housing project called Gellerup. And it was beautiful housing project, Danish modern, and lots and lots of amazing immigrant families. Those of you who are familiar with the Danish immigration system, refugees are kept in refugee camps for 4 years, unable to go to school, not have access to jobs. They're supported by the government, but not really engaged in civic life. And then are able to move out and often move into housing projects because they're quite often not given jobs, so they don't receive the same opportunities in terms of civic engagement after refugee status. So I was in this housing project with like pretty much 99% immigrants, and it was lovely. And I was invited to this Iranian woman's house, and I saw swastikas in the house, and I was like, yeah, maybe she's Hindu. I wasn't sure, and then it turned out no, actually she's a Nazi. And she was like, "You're in this housing project. You're gonna get raped. Those men will rape you." And you know, they will never let you work with their girls, and they're savages, and just on and on. So I walked out, and of course the people from the museum are like, "Oh no, you shouldn't, you know, don't react this way, you know, you should be polite." I'm not known for being polite in circumstances like that. So I walked out and went back to my crib and just kept working. I created this piece, stupid Muslim joke in the square, the central square of Aarhus, and I found out just before that that artist had been on lots of forums, and she was activating other neo-Nazis to come and attack me that day. And so there was like a plan to, you know, it was all on this forum that was online to come and attack me. And I went that day, I did my performance. There I am, freezing cold with nothing on, but here I am, people are engaging. It was fine. It was a big arts day that day, lots going on, and lots of people engaged with me. But I didn't get attacked, and I found out later that actually what happened was I while I was there, all these forums are monitored by a lot of the families who were living in the housing project that I was in. And although like you would consider my work as haram, you know, representing the Muslim body almost nude, the brothers all came out, surrounded the square, and totally protected me. So so there's that. And these are the girls that were never going to work with me. Their families were never going to let them work with me, and their families were like, take these girls, because they were stuck in the house all day and not able to engage in the public sphere because it is not safe for them, because people will attack them, especially in hijab. People would spit on girls, and there were tons of young women that put on hijab on purpose and went out almost like militants to fight people who would be aggressive. But we created public art. We did self-portraiture stencils, and we put these stencils throughout town. So in our with our little art club. So this was our art club. We made T-shirts, and it was super fun. And little brothers, of course, got to join because, you know, if they consider themselves femmes, then that's cool. But also because you know, where are they going to go? So that's all I have to share for now.
Thank you so much. Let's carry through to Tin, who has a reading and is wearing their art.
Myself. Oops. There we go. Hi everybody. Thank you, Zeina, and thank you for having me on this panel. I'm just gonna read this little zine of mine that was actually commissioned by the Women's Center for Critic Works for me to wrote this thing. It's called Decenter Whiteness. Decentering whiteness. It starts with you. But this is not about you. It's about you buying into the system of whiteness, a social, political, and cultural structure that was formed to advantage white, Protestant, heterosexual, property-owning males. You want change? You want just and equitable world? What are you willing to do to achieve it? Are you willing to refuse your whiteness to claim an identity that is not a system of oppression? Are you willing to commit to social justice by creating more equitable structure that privilege none over another? As long as you benefit from whiteness, you are the problem. And there's no hope for you. Whiteness exists and continue to exist and continue to persist is because you let it, because you're not against it. You're not actively dismantling it. Good intentions are simply just that, good intentions. It's not enough. It's not enough to merely desire diversity and inclusion. Diversity and inclusion for whom? Who decides to include who or exclude whom? Who has the power and rights to do so? Remember, the world is already diverse. Diversity without access to power for justice and equity is tokenism, centralizing whiteness, masquerading as equality. It's not enough to desire solidarity and unity. Solidarity and unity to resist who? Whiteness? All the quote unquote enemies are operating and benefiting from this system of whiteness. Remember, as long as you benefit from whiteness, you are the problem, maintaining and upholding its supremacy. Are you willing to resist against yourself? It is not enough to expose and acknowledge whiteness and its self-entitlement. That is just another way to centralize whiteness by exhibiting your white fragility to reconcile your white guilt. So decenter yourself. Decenter your whiteness. If you cannot even decenter yourself and your whiteness, how can you decenter whiteness itself and dismantle this unfair social structure? How? Introspect and self-reflect. Remember, this is not about you. That's this little zine, it's available. If you donate to Black Lives Matters or any of the organizations that benefits the protester, I will let me know, shoot me an email, message me through Instagram, and I'll send you this. And I have 2 other zines I can also send depending on the amount of money you donate. That being said, in the eve of, I guess, the 45 inauguration, I made this series of t-shirts. Previously, I was traveling across the US asking strangers to stay in their home. And I traveled over 46 states, I believe. And I witnessed the sort of multi-microclimate and social cultural structure throughout the United States. And I witnessed lots of discriminations and racism towards me. And I real like, and then since it was funny because when, 45 got elected, everybody was like, oh my God, I can't believe this is us. I can't believe this is America. I was like, well, it's been like that since 1995, since I came to the United States. It never changed. It just become, a lot of people say, more visible. So I made this series of t-shirts in terms of, and we already know, this is where already Edward Snowden came out, telling that the US is, watching us and all of these things. So I want to reinvert the gaze especially the white gaze or the whiteness gaze, by wearing this t-shirt. When they look at me, they are immediately confronted with their own history, with the very foundation of how United States is built. So there's a series of 6 t-shirts that says different things. Like for this one, it says I am racist. The other one says I'm homophobic, I'm xenophobic. So for me, I wear this every day. I walk into the public space with these t-shirts, and different quote unquote ethnicities and identity encounter these t-shirts. The reactions are different. My way of doing it is, this is my form of, I guess, artivism or activism, is I want to engage people in thinking the power structure, not only on an interpersonal spaces or relational, but also on a very structural level. And a lot of people, when they think of racism, they think of prejudice. And it is fundamentally based on prejudice, but there is a structural power within it. And then a lot of people ask me, like, are you racist, when they see me wear these t-shirts? And I was like, I can't be a racist because I have no power to be a racist. Racism is about power. It's about dominance, right? So I'm like, I'm a minority, you know, or whatever other label you want to give me. So this is my way of engaging in conversation with every day, and this is my everyday sort of performance. And the t-shirt back there that you saw, that I have, this is like in the front, and this is the back t-shirt. And this is a personal experience that actually happened during pandemic. I was going to the grocery store and I was just walking crossing the crosswalk back to my place. This presumably white dude driving a huge truck, cutting me off from the crosswalk and try to spit on me. But he was far enough that it didn't land on me. And so there is like, and then meanwhile I'm reading on the news, there's a surge of anti-Asianness because of the coronavirus, quote unquote, came from China, or the China's virus, according to 45. And so, so I made this t-shirt in response to that. It says that my ethnicity is not a virus, and I made 2 other more in response to that. And I went back to the very spot that this guy was trying to spit on me, and I did sort of like public intervention where I walked back and forth for I think an hour, and then people were like stopping the car and they honk, and some people were just kind of weird out, and some people agreed to it. Be like, yes, you are the virus. And so this is sort of my personal experience. And not only am I invoking this with the t-shirt, but I'm also experiencing it personally every day. And I live in a neighborhood that that I'm kind of like the only Asian walking around. So I'm being subjected to a lot of these sort of like prejudice and biases all the time. And I'm being watched, I guess, that I'm being observed. And so this is my way of like, when you look at me, when you observe me, you have to confront with what you are witnessing, which is your own prejudice and your own biases, inverting the gaze, if you will. Anyway, let's back to Zeina and hopefully open to any questions in terms of discussions.
Thank you so much. Something that comes to mind, I have a slew of questions, but what is body politics? It's when things physically, our bodies are affected, whether by policy or by the behaviors around us. And all 3 of you really put your body into your work, your body into line. You're like as your experience going outward. And I just appreciate that so much from all 3 of you. And that could segue into both what Martin was saying with changing your clothes and your attire to not fit into the alert sites or amieties or tin, the performance of identity. And I would love to touch upon that. I could speak from like my own Muslim experience of like performing being a Muslim person. Otherwise, it's like I would love to address that, like performance of identity and the alterations that we do on a daily basis to maneuver different spaces. Is that a question that you could, or like not
Well,
really talking like spur conversation that I'm thinking about a lot right now?
yeah, I think like the body has the potential and has the power to, it depends on how you position yourself, right? When you position yourself in space that is quote unquote white space, a space that you don't belong, you stick out like a sore thumb. But there is sort of vulnerability and there is a sense of victimhood towards that. But also I feel like there is, as an artist, I feel like there is power to invert that. I feel like being that I am, you know, the quote unquote, turning it into survivorhood is one of them that, and then turning, a lot of my practice is turning the idea of being surveillance to itself. Like, no, I see myself as an artist, as role as an observer. I observe and I become the witness. And therefore the power structure become more fluid rather than strict. But of course, when you talk about structural and political policies, those things, of course, I as only one individual, as an artist, cannot change that. But what I have is, thank God for one of the Constitution in the United States, it's the freedom of speech. I can be a citizen who dissent when it comes to power inflicted onto me in an unfair and oppressive way. And I think that's my role as an artist that I do all the time. And well, one of the things that I do with these projects and stuff is I went undercover as a white supremacist, you know, and I observed as, you know, first and foremost, I try to understand their perspective, because the worst thing you can do, quote unquote, you don't understand your enemies, you cannot fight them. So therefore, I have to observe my enemy in order to fight them. I might not fight them physically, but I am fighting them on a political front and a cultural front. And so that's my way of reoriented my sense of body and my sense of power. And I'm basing this idea from this, it's called the observer effect, from physicists who observed atoms and how it changes the state of being. And I feel like my sense of observation and my statements call in response to white supremacy. We as a culture, looking at that, not centralizing it, but criticizing it and literally, culturally, politically dismantling it, that effect will have, to me, cultural impact. And then like now there's talk, because you know, Thanksgiving, and we had to talk to our family whether we should empathize with those who, like, you know, supported 45. I'm like, empathy is in good, it's there and it is in good use, but there is no empathy for somebody that wants to oppress other people. That's what. Anyway, pass on the torch to Mara and Amethyst. I wonder what they think about this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Well, I could kind of pick on the idea of the masking of the body, you know, like in my case, like I started working with other people imagery, like portraits and stuff, and I find it conflicted that I was talking about race and racism or stereotypes from another perspective, you know, putting someone on the front but not putting myself. So I engaged in this idea that I couldn't talk about these issues if it wasn't from my own perspective. Just as Sim say, you know, like this is my perception, and my perception navigating all these spaces is not, it's not the reality for everyone. So I think that's, for me, is what's most important in that case, putting my body up front and understanding all this from my own positioning. And also the idea of masking the body, like I could see from colonial times, and the idea of shaming and how they would mask you and put you in public spaces to shame you. And that's the way they could gain control of your body, over your family, over the structure in a way. And at the same time, I think I kind of play with Tim's idea of inverting the gaze. Like I like to believe in I wouldn't call it a theory, but there is these artists, Chilean artists, las Yeguas del Apocalipsis, which was a club of artists, queer artists, and they believe in this idea that you position yourself in the worst case scenario, or the worst level that you can, and then you empower yourself from that. So in their case, like navigating Chile and a very homosexual Chile back in the 80s, 70s, 80s, they call themselves playos or fagas or queer, and position themselves in the lower case, because that way they could engage power to confront all this stereotype that they navigate every day. And I really find it powerful in that sense, because it's very similar to like how you would say, like dances that you find all through Latin America. Like if you go to Colombia, there is this dance named El Baile del Blanco y el Negro, which is the dance of black and white. And it kind of engraved in this idea of that there were like black natives in Colombia who were being suppressed, and the people to empower themselves, that would kind of like dress or paint themselves black to counter like to counter the power of the colony in a sense. Or if you go to Nicaragua, you have the El Baile Neguense, which is like indigenous people portraying the colonizer, but making fun of them, empowering themselves through making fun of the people who oppress them in a way. So I think there's a lot of relationship in that sense.
Well, I think when you're talking also about performing, performing our identities, um, certainly we're performers. And when we talk about surveillance, I think that surveillance and direction of the directors of how we perform our identities move beyond the state and move into our localities, because there's a kind of internalized colonization that has happened, where people really want you to fit within the niches. And you see that day to day. You see that today, even within activist circles, even within like so-called woke circles. So there's that. And then there's the notion of this like you should only kind of like, and I heard you saying it, Martin, too, that I can only sort of perform or speak on my own experience. And that's very humble of you, because the truth is that in terms of academic rigor and academia, you are not supposed to speak on your own experience, right? So speaking on your own experience is considered novice and not rigorous. And it was like people like Said, it was actually Said who very vehemently fought against that and said that it should be a first person experience that is considered one of the realms of research.
I mean, like what you said, to me, it's like the of course now become a cliche, like, from the feminist perspective, the personal is historical, right? The personal is cultural, the personal is social. I think there is, for me, that still remains relevant, because we as an individual, we don't live in isolations. We live in a society. We live in a political government, and we live in a religious structure, in a patriarchal structures. All of these structures, to me, they're forms of surveillance. They're form of controlling our bodies, controlling our behavior. I mean, for me, one of the most greatest structure of surveillance at the very beginning of civilizations is religion. That's, moral code, moral values, how you act, how you perform, your gender role, all of that. I mean, if you look at how even our government function right now within this very administration, it's structure based on that as well. So for me, surveillance is a form of control and power. But how it becomes oppressive, and how we as individuals, of course, as artists, we're always, going against the grain of society, how we perform the idea of our surveillance internally and externally, as culture producer and, you know, within our own culture. I mean, like you say, in the woke culture, quote unquote woke culture, there's a call out culture. We constantly call out each other. And there's this is the one thing that when I was doing research, there's a lot, the way in which the left think and the right thinking is very similar in psychological structure and mentality wise, because they're thinking in extreme, right? And then it's always speaking to each other and not speaking to each other directly, but speaking in very echo chamber kind of thing. And then in the woke culture, like anything you said, you can be called out for anything. Really, really. And to me, that is a form of internalized surveillance, or if you want to call it internalized racism, internalized all internalized patriarchy, like all of these things we internalize because we grow up and we live within the structure, so it becomes an embodied concept in our mind. Not unless we tease it out of our mind and deconstruct and be like, nah, this system doesn't work. And that's why for me, my practice is, my work stems from the realization that whiteness is not my history. My gender is not my identity, and my identity is not a product of my cultural values, because I value different things in all of these structures that raised me up and where I grew up to be. I'm like, well, I don't value patriarchy. Like, that's not my value. That's not who I am. Who I am. I don't value this religious structure that, you know, oppresses me. I'm like, no, I don't want this religious structure. So for me, I see all of these systems as form of surveillance and behavioral structure for me to exist within boundaries. And then for me, how do I conceptually, mentally, and as an individual defy those boundaries and define those structures in the mind first, and then externalizing it, and then hopefully become a creature. And be like, hey, let's not think about that. Let's think about it structurally differently.
Well, and then jumping back in and talking about, you know, the way we perform our identities. Um, I think how things are canonized are super important too, right? And I can say that all of us come from cultures whose libraries or forms of thinking have been burned down. And so our legacies and histories are mostly oral, are mostly things that we've shared with one another. And there's this idea, and many of you may have heard it, if you martyr yourself in the name of Islam, you will go to heaven and be able to be with 72 virgins.
Mm-hmm.
Where this story was actually fabricated in Finland. So it was not a Muslim that fabricated this story, but it was interestingly it was appropriated by Islamists later, and it was repeated. And so it almost seems like that's ours. That's something that belongs to us. I mean, like, you can even think of so many types of food that people are like, oh, this is Mexican food, this is Chinese food. And you're like, and anyone who comes from those countries is like, what is that? I have never seen that, you know, or whatever. But, you know, these fabrications that are created outside of your cultures that identify you and then become appropriated back. So there's so many layers, and we can even look at that, you know, beyond colonialism, pre-colonialism, into like other eras of not colonialism, colonialism. I'm thinking about food, you know, it's lunchtime.
I mean, there's imperialism before colonialism, right? So of course that's a whole nother power structure and power of surveillance, where again, like, one mandated from heaven and God, like, still, like, for me, one of the biggest form of surveillance to me, I mean, the deeper I do my research and into the kind of practice that I do, is really when it comes down to religious belief. Like, you know, a king is mandated from God to rule all over, you know, his subject. And then of course, like, then in colonialism, and then now we have, you know, a president, still like chosen by the people, but still the government is like, surveilling us as a form of like, and then recently I just read something that's quite interesting. Racism and prejudice in reality has very physical effect on our mental health. And then there's studies that shows that it actually increases the hypertension and diabetes, and it literally all of these stress and all of these anxieties in terms of surveillance, how it's being observed, affecting our very physical bodies and our very mental health. Which is, I mean, it's not surprising, but but it kind of like sort of validate what structural oppression can do from a very mental to a very, very sort of like physical embodied experience. And, for me, I live in Nguyen. It's all Central American. Of course, there are minorities within minorities, but I'm like the only Asian walking around. Even then, like there's so many biases and so many prejudices that are thrown at me every day every time I walk down the street.
We do it to each other.
Huh?
We do it to each other. Like amongst
we do it to each other, and they're like, "Oh, you chinito this, chinito that," and then I was like, so one of the examples funny because this guy who like has a taco truck, he would be like, every time I order taco, he was like, "Hey, you Chinese, come and get it," like in Spanish, or I guess, in Spanish, and then I would just be so one time I was like, "I'm not Chinese, I'm Vietnamese. You can say, hey, Vietnamese, come and get it." But I was like, and then he wouldn't listen. So next time I was like, okay, Mexican, I'll come and get it. I know he's not Mexican, but he like, he's a Colombian, but he hates being called Mexican. So I said that, I was like, well, you look Mexican to me. I'm like, he's like, you look Chinese to me. I was like, so it's in a funny way, like just this sort of like playful kind of thing with him, sort of like reposition his way of thinking and reposition his way of thinking about stereotypes. So he was stereotyping me into this like general what Asian is. And so I'm throwing that back at him to like, hey, I'm thinking of you as like, because you're quote unquote Latino, you're Mexican. So by throwing that back at him, he kind of sort of become like, he's like offended. He's like, I'm not Mexican, I'm Colombian. I was like, oh, great, thanks for letting me know. I appreciate that. So next time I will refer to you as Colombian and not Mexican. And then he stopped from then on referring to me as Chinese and referring to me as Vietnamese. So there's ways to dismantle that, and for me in a way, in a playful and gentle way, and it doesn't have to be uncomfortable or it doesn't have to be completely violent, because I feel like conflict is inevitable, but violence is a choice. And I feel like we can choose to speak to each other in a way that could be self-reflective and introspective, and that could change your behavior in that sense. And I feel like that's what I'm doing a lot with the t-shirts when people confront me and like, you're racist. And I'm like, well, let's talk about that. How do you know? And so when I explain to them, no, just racism is a structural power. Only those in power can be racist. And they're like, oh, I never thought of it that way. For me, that's the kind of impact. For me, that's kind of real impact that I feel that my art is trying to make, and that I'm as an artist trying to make. And so I feel like there are different approaches in a way in which we can confront our own selves first, and how we dismantle all of these internalizations that we have at the beginning. And then we can, I'm blanking on her name, but she's one of the most, the quote was, once you're free, free other. Is this Toni Morrison's or who say this? Anyway, I'm blanking on the name, but that to me has a very great impact in the sense of like, first, introspections, self-reflections, to understand the entangled, internalized structures, political, and be that surveying our own selves, and then externalizing in a way that like, how can I people see that's how they're behaving, and their behavior is really harmful to other people, be it within our communities or outside of our communities. I feel like that's my role as an artist, and that's what I'm trying to do. Do I accomplish that or not? I don't know. That's to be for the future generation to realize.
Is it possible to open up and hear from other folks? I'd really love to hear. But one thing I wanted to talk about with everyone just before we do is, when we talk about surveillance, I feel like, so often it's presented to us like it's a comforting blanket. It's something to take care of you. It's for your own good. I mean, after all, God is watching. God is always surveilling. So this creepy notion of surveillance becomes something that, becomes embedded in our spirituality, and we have no privacy in our thoughts. It's something that's taught to us that we absolutely have no right to privacy. And I feel like that's something that was really given to me in America. I didn't feel like I learned that in Iran, and I don't feel like I learned that in my Iranian family, that there are private realms. But yeah.
I mean, even look, in our justice system, we have to put our hand on the Bible and swear,
Oh, I don't have to. You don't have to. I don't. But then every time I say I'm Muslim, they run out to get a Quran, and I'm like, I don't really want to, but I don't can you please bring the wretched to the earth, and I can put my hand on that?
Put my hand on something.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I say religion to me is the first form of surveillance there is, because if it's God is the ultimate big brother watching us, right? And for those who are atheists, what do you say about about that?
We would have more privacy.
I love that you use two terms, the observer and the witness. And being a witness to something and observing something, it seems like being a witness, like you have power within that. Like you could take your witnessing and enact something. But then it's just a nice notion to think about, observing something versus being a witness to something. It's just a thought that I was thinking about, because you said that interchangeably, and I'm like, wait, to be a witness is powerful too, because you could put that in court and all this stuff, write it down. And then to be an observation of something, people often then feel like, I'm just observing, but it's as if you're not in the thing, you're just as if you're on the outside looking.
Habibti, of course.
I don't know. I freaking love that, unwrapping
a witness. Of course, Habibti, because you're Muslim and you're like the shahada. It's important.
But I think that there's also this idea of that to be under surveillance have a chance. It's clear that what you're looking for, what their surveillance are doing. So in that idea of the witness and the witness, also you have to trust, and that they're gonna be trustful, and the transparency and their word. You know what I mean? So it always kind of just shift and overlap one another in the sense, who do we trust, and what we're gaining out of that trust in that sense.
See, for me, they're two very different things that are interchangeable. To me, an observer is a very much a sort of westernized perspective. It's very clinical. You're like a scientist, you observe and you clinically, and it's a very sort of colonial ideology. Whereas a witness,
probably the painter.
You are in the moment. You are witnessing the things that's happening, and you are accountable and responsible when you are being a witness, right? Because like you say, you can go to court and do this. So there's accountability and responsibility with witnessing. Whereas an observer, you observe and you take notes, and it becomes a very clinical and it's a very scientific kind of thing. You study your subject. There's an objectivity and there's a subjectivity to it. As an observer. So I feel like they're two very different functions. So when I say my role as an artist is a witness rather than an observer, because I have accountability, because I am accountable for what I say, for what I put out into the world. So there is responsibility to that, and the kind of impact I want to make. There's responsibility to that. Whereas an observer, when I observe white supremacy, there's no interaction with them. I just observe them. It's a very clinical thing that I do. I'm like, okay, this is what you think, Like, you know, so there is power being the observer because I observe my subject as an object. Whereas the witnessing as a role as an artist, I am accountable and more responsible. I don't know if that makes any sense.
It does. Thank you.
Anyway, should we open it to the audience?
Let's open it up. So it's 1:09. We are past 1, but I would love to. Does anyone have any questions or thought or wants to share anything personally or not personally? Please open it up. You could raise your hand in the chat box and unmute, or open up your screen, or just put the question in the chat box and we will say it out loud for you.
Hi.
Hi, Ginevra.
Hi, Zeina. How are you?
Doing good.
I have a question. So, as someone who's currently in my MFA and I've been in classrooms before in teaching positions, I'm spending a lot of time right now trying to educate myself as much as possible on like pedagogical structures and how to create space for BIPOC people and students, because I know my friends and like students I've had in the past have talked about how sometimes teachers will try and create space for the student to express their identity or their experiences and then not be critical with them, and so they lose out on that aspect. Or on the flip side, there's they end up making the student feel like they're talking for their entire culture. So I'm just curious, like in terms of being a white observer or like feeling that white gaze in the classroom, if there was any teachers in your experience that gave you that space or you felt supported, or and my guess is that you know, having BIPOC professors is really where that happens for you. But yeah, anyway, that's I don't know if that's clear, but that's kind of my question.
No, that's a great question, especially to our future educators, our future white educators.
Zeina, you do have experience with this. Why don't you say something?
I think that within a lot of educators, a lot of people think that they're creating that space, but there is that lack of like open dialogue that comes with it. I think that identity is a very scary subject for a lot of people. I don't know why. It's just like ingrained within, like I could mention something and then I receive the onslaught. I'm not sure if I have any advice, but I know myself as an educator, I don't censor my students. I don't censor their work in any form. You have to, I don't know if it's a creation of the space, but just allowing your students to be themselves. That's like something that I felt in conversation with Tin and Martin and Ami, and I can call you mentors even. But the thing is that I found so problematic is that so many professors, especially white professors, are trying to make their classroom diverse. And I'm just trying to say that it already is, especially in California, especially in a school that's like near central California anyway. Like it already is diverse. So just allow that to be. It's kind of like an action for me. I don't know if I have any direct advice per se, but it's actually, the simple allowance of it and openness to it is a huge thing for me. Like that's like step one.
I'm not sure if I have
so many issues happen when people try too hard to be equitable and diverse and bring these things. I'm like, and that's when like tokenization happens. That's when stereotyping happens and all these issues. And it's really just like colonizing the classroom. So you have to really try to not be that colonizer yourself. I don't know if that
not
helps.
to base it in buzzwords. You know, there's action language that's hot now and not so hot tomorrow. I like that term, BIPOC. I don't use it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, don't
people
use it.
Have specific
I mean,
you know,
that's great.
Have
yeah,
very
thank
specific background. But that's me. That's me personally. You know, that I don't speak on behalf of everybody. But you know, would you ever think about giving up your space to teach to somebody else, a person of color?
That's a beautiful question. And I've read a lot of books where like the author just gets to a point and they're like, maybe you shouldn't take up that space. So yeah, it's something I've gone back and forth on a lot. And like, yeah.
Well, for me, there's two things, like the fact that people call person of color or BI, whatever, you are already delineating yourself from the position of power looking down. You see that, the observer effect? I'm like, no, I'm better than you, so therefore you are lower than me. This is how I call you. So you're centralizing whiteness already. So therefore, power structure is already divided. There's no way you can create space. The fact that the desire, not just you in particular, but anybody in any institution to desire to create space for other people, that is already power structure. That means
it's a construction of hierarchy.
That's it. Exactly.
Right? You never have access before. So now this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna create access for you. So therefore, here's some space for you. That's not
it.
Creating structural space. That's more oppressions and centralizing your own power and putting yourself on the pedestal. There's no way you can create space with that kind of mindset and perceptions. The way in which you can quote unquote create space, there's no need to create space. Space already exists. Mm-hmm. So how do you do that? It's you create opportunities rather than access. Because when you talk about access, there's already inaccessibility already. Opportunity is already there. It's just there. Don't take it up. Let it go. Give other, not even give, back off of the damn opportunity. Because a lot of people, they're being very greedy. They're not being generous. And it's out of this power structure and dynamic that they think, oh, I need to do this, I need to do that. It's out of savior complex, especially white savior complex. And that is motivated by white guilt. And that's just like, once again, descent to whiteness. You're just centralizing your own white power, and white powers continue to be centralized, and whiteness continues to be centralized.
Not to say that artists who come from non-white backgrounds are not contributing to white supremacy. That happens quite often. Mm-hmm. You know, I think you know, I do want to discuss also the issue of pedagogy. When I was in grad school, you know, it's interesting because all of us come from various generations of grad school, myself being the youngest, of course. And when I was in grad school, stop laughing, Tin. I see you.
That makes you say that and it makes me laugh.
So I remember when I was in grad school, I was in a studio visit, and I'm calling out names because I never called out this dude's name before, but Roland Reese sat in a studio visit with me, and he was sitting across from me, and he kept trying to get me to understand. He's like, I need you to understand, like, what you're doing is wrong. And so he goes, have you ever seen the work of Anish Kapoor? And I'm like, yeah. So he goes, when you look at his work, you would never know that he's Indian. And the thing is that he did not understand that Anish Kapoor was creating white work. Actually, he was contributing to a cultural discourse. However, some of us have an embedded aesthetic. And it's not like, I'm not trying to be Iranian. Mm-hmm. It's just there. Mm-hmm. It's just there. And I'm trying to speak in particular, like people ask me, who do you create work for? And I think that that's really important to ask your students, who are you creating work for? And I said, well, I want to create work for my mother, my aunts, and her friends, because nobody fucking thinks of them when they're making work. And I want to be that one. And guess what? My mama, my aunts, and all their friends, and all the women like them, like my work. So.
I know. I think that's a very valid question. I mean, the valid idea to bring. I mean, this is what I do with a graduate student all the time. I was like, have you ever considered your audience? Like, who are you making work for? And for me, it's a lot of times like, most artists like this idea of like, it's intuitions, like, I'm just creating out of my intuitions and all this. I'm like, well, without an audience, your work wouldn't be the art that it needs to be, So you are creating, you are communicating. So therefore, there is a back and forth in terms of communicating. I'm like, what are you trying to communicate? And one of them, I think, it's the opposite of what you say. It's like, you always like, why is your art doesn't look like Asian? And so I was like, what does Asian art look like? And then they have to like explain to me
too,
what art look like, right? And they're like, and then I was like, and then they're like, they when they explained, they try to go, oh, but like Vietnamese art. I mean, Vietnamese. I was like, what does Vietnamese art look like? And they couldn't, for the life of their imagination and their creativity, of all the research they could ever pull out of their freaking brain, they couldn't come up with what Vietnamese art looked like, right? So I was like, no. I live in this culture. I am informed by this culture. Therefore, my goal is to dismantle this culture and dismantle the toxic values that is imposed onto me. So therefore, that's what my work is about. And then so when I say that, they're all like, ah. So to me, and then a lot of people say my work is very didactic, like pedagogical. I'm like, all works are didactic in one point or another, because you are expressing yourself and an idea to another artist and the audience. You'd be like, hey, this is what I think. What do you think? And so that it's preposterous for people to be like, oh, your work gotta look this way, gotta look that way. That is another form of power structure, right? So they're thinking from their white perspective and how they could exoticize. But the thing is with the center whiteness is one of the things is that, and if you look throughout art history, there's so many artists that does buy into the system of whiteness because they can benefit from it. They can be tokenized in it and they luxuriate in it and they become the powerhouse, quote unquote, within the institutions. So
including bringing in the exotification.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
That's a really good point. Is minorities that want to be like the token queen or the token, the token bitch.
And I hate that I just threw shade on Anish Kapoor. I'm losing my voice because I actually like Anish Kapoor's work. Not all of it, to be honest with you, because I feel like one of the ways he got his foot in was he really hid being Indian. But I do like Anish Kapoor's work.
So I mean, so it's like for us as quote unquote artists of color, they like to call us, how do we as individual, again, like this is the idea, back to the idea of surveillance, right? The idea of witnessing each other. How do we as individual dismantle the structure of tokenizations? It's a form of political appeasement, because if you notice, if there's any upheaval within any community, the institution immediately with their white savior complex come out and tokenize that. Choose one of their messiah within the group and tokenize the individual. I ain't got to name names. Look throughout history book and you see them.
I feel like that creates a psychosis among people, and feeling like they have to fight with one another. And we did talk about that a little bit in a conversation we had yesterday. I think we mostly talked about penises yesterday, but we also talked a little bit about I don't know how, but
we ended on penis and
conversation about penis.
But it was a beautiful conversation.
So yeah, for me, like the system continuously creates scarcity within our community, within each other. So therefore, we have to fight against each other. And once you get inside the door, of course, you're not going to leave the door ajar. You're going to shut it and be like, now I like to be in this position, and I like to be in this position of power. To me, that's how you maintain white supremacy. That's how you maintain the system of whiteness. And for me, it's like, how do we as cultural producer, how do we as culture developer, how do we as quote, critical thinker dismantle this very structure? And I think this pandemic, it really scrambling, all the institutions scrambling to do that. In actuality, I'm working with a few institutions right now to sort of like restructure the thinking in terms of that. And this is exactly what I brought up to them. And I was like, well, this is a system that you've been used to. Let's dismantle this model. Let's look at a different model. Let's see how you can function within this model. And none of them don't know how to do that.
Or work grassroots, work on your own, work outside of the institution. It's all about coalition building, you know, it's all about working together and connecting with one another, listening to one another. I am personally, another terminology that I don't like to use, or term or whatever, is SWANA. I can't stand that because it leaves out a lot of people. But I do work quite a bit with artists who are either from Southwest Central Asia and North and East Africa. And with those groups of people in particular, you know, there's always, I mean, I can speak on that. Always the one that's like, no, I thought of that first. Like, I own the color green. No one else should be using the color green. And, you know, like, I invented all of this music and no one else should be using this music. I'm going to get my attorneys on you. And, you know, I think it's about understanding that movements, people think alike. We work together in movements. I mean, otherwise, look at all of these movements throughout history. They weren't all like, hey, you stole from me, you use the color blue. You know, it's super important to like think alike, work together, build with one another, talk to each other. I mean, if you feel violated, talk to that person and be like, yo, you know, you did that and I don't feel right about it. But I think that dialogue and the discourse among one another has stopped. And we're constantly trying to have that dialogue with institutions, because institutions want to pull us in and be like, I want to tap into your brain. My brain is reserved for my sisters. My sisters get my brain first. So, I mean, I'm constantly getting like, let me tap into your brain. But guess what? Zeina's going to get my brain first before anybody else. So that's what I do personally, and that's the direction I work in. I believe in the grassroots. If I have any energy left beyond that, because I got a damn job too, I got a full-time job. So if I do anything beyond that, then, you know, I'll be like, all right, I'll be here. What you got for me? You know, and I know, Tim, you do that. You're like, what you got for me, first of all? I know we're gonna learn from that brother right there. But like, what you got for me? If I'm gonna come to your table, what are you gonna give to my community? And then maybe I'll sit in with you. But apart from that, I really do believe it's about grassroots. Working with the grassroots, you know, like to invest your time. I mean, this right here is a gallery that decided to move outside of the realm of what's like hot in the market. They're working in the valley. Mm-hmm. You know, like that to me, I was right then. I mean, it's Zeina, she's the sister, but also it's in the valley. And I was like, oh yeah, I'm on top of that. I'm there, because I don't say yes to everything. I don't have the time. You know, there's no way I could do all that energy.
No, and I feel like your idea that what they're trying to do is get into your mind, and I totally believe on that also. I think the part of the project of all this colonial or this structure is to get into your mind and try to destroy your mind. Not destroy your mind, but try to destroy your values. You know, that there is this Guatemalan writer, Emma Chirac, and she say that part of the whole idea of colonialism is to take out the indigenous, in her case, out of her. You know, once they take the indigenous part out of you, you cater to that whiteness that we've been talking about, you know? So I think the beauty of it is kind of resist through our knowledge, through our culture, through our values, through our beliefs, and, you know, find ways to align with other people who might have the same way of thinking. And from there, you could work outside the institution or outside the structure and create another structure. Like for me, specifically coming from Costa Rica, you know, people talk about art market, you know, and I have to laugh within the idea of art market because I live in a country that doesn't have an art market. So when you talk to me and when you come to me and my practice and try to embed it, the idea of an art practice is like, you don't know what I do. So how come you're going to talk about selling my work when I live in a place that I don't survive through selling my work, you know, and I have to figure out other ways to survive by getting in touch with friends who could produce either video or content and create from there, you know. So it's interesting how we have to understand that not every artist have the same structure, function the way, or have to be into the system in that case, you know.
I mean, to me, back to the idea of surveillance, this is how I felt like a lot of time when it comes to my art, quote unquote, career trajectory. I feel like I'm being constantly watched and observed by the people, by the institution, by the art market, and how marketable and capitalized they can milk for me, how exotic I become or inexotic I become, how toxic I become to them, and how relevant I become to them so that they can use me as a way to virtue signal, you know, to make them become more relevant. So all of this is a form of observing the form. I mean, they are literally watching me. Every step that I make, every mishap, every bridge I burn, or every connection I make. So there's this idea of I'm constantly being watched within the art world also. So there's like multiple structure that are always constantly surveying and surveilling us. But my question to all of you is, how do you thrive within that structure? Not just survive, but thrive without catering on the structure.
Oof. I think it's a tricky question, you know, because sometimes you have to play with it, you know, to obtain something out of it. But knowing, you know, you're doing it willingly and you're knowing how to capitalize from that, you know. So I think you're always coming in and out, and you're not always completely out of the system, but you kind of like have to manage the way to filter, you know, like intercept, get out of it, come back in, get out, and take advantage of it in a way. So I don't know. I think that's kind of the way I see it, you know, like taking part of institutions that not making money out of what they're doing, but they're really interested in the practice or the subject that you're talking about, and you know, try to mediate that. And for me, like knowing that I don't want to be in a blue chip gallery, or part of the work that I do is not really sellable in a blue chip gallery. So that's the other part of it too, you know, like understanding where you want to position yourself and your work.
I think positioning is really important, what you said. I feel like I've navigated my work in a direction that I'm not the one that they're really looking at in that way. Sometimes they start and then they realize I'm going to be combative. And maybe not even me. I won't even be around. My work will bite at them, and they won't. They leave it alone. So in some ways, it's been really amazing because of the audiences I do get, and in other ways, yeah, it limits me because people don't necessarily want to canonize me in what's contemporarily considered the art canon. But I have a feeling that canon is going to change really soon, and I'm investing in that. I'm investing my time in things changing. That's where my direction and my investment goes in. I don't really care about their looking, whoever they are, the man. Yeah, I think I want to. I pick my audience. I choose. You know, as Too Short said, I'm choosing you. So. And did I quoted Too Short?
You just quoted.
I'm hungry.
I love it.
Because I haven't eaten. I apologize. I was like, I just said a Too Short quote.
I love it. Thank you all. I know that there's only a few minutes, like that we're way over, but it's just like too good to cancel out. We'll do our exit comments soon. I do want to answer within Ginevra's question as well, and people's questions, is on that notion of like dismantling the institution. I just had this experience with my thesis show at the Manetti Shrem Museum that's attached to UC Davis. I'm going to call out the name because you called out the name and your bravery. But at the end, I decided to pull my work from the show. I was like, I don't even want to be associated with the institution. I've removed my work. I technically don't have a thesis through the Manetti Shrem Museum, removed it off of my CV and walked away. And I added the pressure onto the museum of this, and this, including quotes from undergrads, worked with graduate students from previous graduating class, wrote a letter out to the museum, and I kind of let it be. The thing is that there's people inside of the institution that aren't happy with the system. However, they don't want to give up any of the power of they still want to be in it, and they still want the check. So what that's happened through that is that in the end, I'm being asked by numerous people to continue putting the pressure on the institution. this is not fair to do to people that are not white, is white people that have very little risk telling other people to put all of their life and even though it's more risky, to stand up and break down the institution and say, well, I can't do it because I'm on the inside. I'm all like, no, you can do a lot of things from the inside, and you actually have less risk than asking other people to do that risk taking for you. And there was a point that I had to step away and say, you know what? I just graduated from grad school. I need to work on myself and concentrate on shit and kind of like re-empower myself from all of like the bullshit and the low self-esteem of graduating afterwards. You know, I really needed to like go back to like, who was I before grad school? Let me go back to that person for a minute and then take all the knowledge and the experiences that I have and then add that to that rather than erase that person before, because that person was pretty cool and really brave. So that's something that I think that we need to do, especially as people that have used the institution to graduate from it. I will say that an MFA was a careerist move for me completely. I wanted that paper. And I can admit that. I know that's like a shame to say, but I will admit that to myself. Because everyone wants to say, like, you went for intellectual, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, no, I wanted the paper.
In here.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of times, like, institutions use quote unquote people of color as a shield,
yes.
As a slaughter to the lamb, or whatever you want to metaphor.
Yeah, they just want to like sacrifice the person. I'm like, nah.
Yes.
I want to sacrifice.
Here's this thing, and then they use you as a shield, as a way to like, look how virtuous we are. They can hide their centralization, they can hide their power behind you and put you in the forefront. That's where exoticization and tokenizations turn into a form of political appeasement, and therefore signaling this virtue, that they are this virtuous institution that's doing the good work, but continue to centralize their own power. And then at the moment you're no longer useful, they pull the rug out of you, bam, you topple over and you are disposable. The next cool one can come in. You know what I mean? So this is the power structure that's been repeated years and years and years. So we, as culture producer, we are being literally watched by the institutions. The moment you come out, they cherry pick you, they print you into this thing so that it becomes their political appeasement, so they can do the continuous centralizing their power. So how do then we as individual become aware of this, you know, Wizard of the Oz game, and then be like, no, I am not gonna be disillusioned by this idea that you're giving me power, that you're giving me space, that you're giving me all of these things. I'm like, it's not a given, bitch. Oops, excuse my Vietnamese.
I don't want your gift. Fuck your gift.
Well, and I think there's, so going back to the notion of pedagogy too, and surveillance, there's the pedagogy of love, right? And a good example is actually, so Sarah Ahmed at Goldsmiths, and I think you can read about that. You know, I won't get into it because I actually have to go soon. But Sarah Ahmed basically left Goldsmiths because of things that were happening to her students. So, so I really recommend looking into that.
I will look that up, but I think I did read something from her. But one of another thing that I want to point out is that we as artists need to understand that very structure in which we will be existing, or we are existing in. It's like, understand the ground you're standing on in order for us to walk the ground more stable, instead of being constantly at any moment being pulled off, and then we then become, you know, disempowered at any moment. And I think that's really important. And I feel like one of the things that inverting that gaze to me is really important. How do then you look at the institution, observing the fact that you are learning and navigating and understand how the system works and exposing the system, you are surveilling them. So there is power in surveillance, there is control in surveillance. But just like any tools, it is a tool. How is it useful and how is it harmful? So for us, we can use it as a tool. for the benefit of the thing. And one of the things that I'm working with the institutions is the idea of the culture of care. The institution is always the idea of exploitation. So for me right now, my goal is to turning those institutions into this institution exploitation to an institution of care. How can you take care of the cultural worker that you're supposed to supposedly empower and elevate and what have you, preserve? So that's where we as artists, we as culture, like how do you turn the tools of surveillance to the tool of care? You know, like how you have little baby monitor to watch your baby so that they don't go in danger. That could be another tool of surveillance, right? But it's of care rather than of control. Anyway, that's all I have to say. There's no questions. All the audience are gone now.
And one person joins us at the end. 40 minutes. I love it. Okay, well, we could go on for hours. So I'm just going to closing statements this. Unless any of you have a closing thing that you wanted to really share, Martin or Tim.
I think I already did share my closing statement.
Right. We've done a lot. All right, so thank you so much for your time. This is the last of this discussion series. These talks are recorded and can be found on 1111 ACC's YouTube page. You can sign up for the 1111 ACC newsletter through their website for further updates on the residency and what I make in response to layers of watching and being watched. I'll be entering the physical space of Embed Gallery. I'm really excited this Monday. And I'll be working under surveillance. I'm putting a camera up. You can like creepily watch me through a YouTube link. We'll see what happens through it. And all information will be posted in the air section. I'm super grateful for the time, space, and opportunity provided by the co-founders and directors of 1111, a creative collective. Aaron Stone and Ade Gonzalez Renteria are like really cool individuals. And as well as the whole 1111 ACC team, Toolbox LA, and the Department of Cultural Affairs Los Angeles for giving some funding to this whole program. And I'm super grateful for Martin, Tin, and Ami for being and talking with us. So that's my closing statement.
Thank you, Zeina. This is really great.
Thank you so much.
But thank you for the stimulating conversation and for allowing me to share my work and my crazy ideas.
Yeah.
Same. I will be watching you, so be careful.
It's okay. It's okay. I like being watched anyway.
A little voyeurism with it, for sure. I know I'm being watched. Yeah. Okay, well, I'll leave it to Aaron Stone with some closing thoughts on 1111, and we'll end the meeting.
Hi, all. I really don't have many closing thoughts at all, except for how fucking valuable this conversation has been. Like, thank you so much, all of you, for speaking about this, and to Zeina for hosting this entire series. I personally have learned so much, and I think it's such a necessary conversation to be had. And I am sensitive from the aspect or the standpoint of the institution. Mm-hmm. And I'm just so happy to have even been able to host this. So thank you. And everybody, please do check out the website. All of these conversations, discussions have been recorded. They're all so valuable. So please kind of dedicate some time to watching through them. Thank you all and have a wonderful Sunday. We'll talk soon.
Thank you for caring.
Thank you so much.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Thank you. Take care.
Bye. Thank you, everyone, for joining. All of you are awesome.